Item SCP-342. Object Class: Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. SCP-342 can be safely stored in its case file folder in an envelope stapled to the inside cover, as it poses no danger so long as it is not actively used. Said case file folder should be kept in a secure file cabinet in high-value item storage, and protected by a standard array of biological, chemical, memetic, and physical positive action defenses. Description: SCP-342 normally takes the form of a mass transit ticket for the closest form of mass transportation to its location. At the moment, it takes the form of a train ticket, departing from station. When held by a sentient person for any length of time, it will eventually change form into a transit ticket for a form of transportation its holder desires to use. This transformation always takes place when not being directly or indirectly observed. No recordings of SCP-342 changing form exist at this time. SCP-342 is indistinguishable from any valid ticket and may be used as such. Should SCP-342 be validated by stamp, tearing off the ticket stub or disposal, it will reform itself into an unused ticket after a short period of time. SCP Foundation personnel should be on site to recover SCP-342 after the conclusion of any field experiments. Anyone who uses SCP-342 to board a vehicle is unable to exit said vehicle by any means. Once the vehicle ends its route and ceases movement, the user will disappear from this reality. Users report mounting a feeling of dread prior to boarding the vehicle, which increases during the course of the journey and accumulates in panic-enduring terror shortly before disappearance. Specific phenomena often resemble acute paranoid schizophrenia and include a perception of increased darkness of the sky outside of the vehicle. This includes fog, premature light, or most frequently, dreary, depressing weather. Auditory hallucinations, most frequently, misperception of normal announcements by drivers and passengers, i.e. an announcement of the next stop is heard as a declaration that the user will never stop. Normal objects, such as other passengers and non-threatening items, suddenly taking a threatening tone or appearance. Strange occurrences completely preventing the rider from getting off of the vehicle. The absolute knowledge that it is impossible to get off. Inability to perceive other passengers exiting and entering the vehicle. Users report that the other passengers appear to simply appear and vanish from their seats and, in some cases, cannot perceive that a passenger has exited the vehicle, continuing to see them in their seats. And the inability to hear or perceive attempts to calm or reason with them. Although the most acute experiences are limited to the user only, bystanders, including the agents assigned to observe the subject, do report feelings of uneasiness and will be compelled to exit the vehicle early, seeking other means of transportation. Addendum 342-A. Object was discovered in Chicago during 1936 by... Case was reopened several years later as it was hoped that advances in technology would allow for a deeper understanding of Addendum 342-B. The importance of retrieving SCP-342 after it is validated for travel cannot be understated. Please see Report Re Dr. Lank incident in which SCP-342 was not successfully retrieved after validation, resulting in a 6-month-long containment breach causing the disappearances of several New York City civilians. SCP Foundation personnel are requested and required to use any means up to and including impersonation of a peace officer, intimidation, threats, and actual use of deadly force to retrieve the item. Addendum 342-C. Agent Report. Our first experiment with a ticket had a Class D personnel member enter onto a bus using the object. We stationed agents at each of the stops to observe his behavior without actually entering onto the vehicle. A precaution in case everyone who got on was in some way affected. The old reports were vague in this area. Many times he simply sat in place, or paced up and down the aisles. Increasingly, he began to stare outside in horror, and the last few times we could not locate him.
At the final point before the bus was to be parked for the night, we saw him pounding on the window with a pleading expression, screaming towards the agent for our help as he pulled away. A strange mist must be filling the background behind him. As we could not draw many conclusions from this event, we decided to track down some of the passengers and interrogate them, to hopefully shed some light on what happened. Many were hesitant to talk or claimed they did not notice anything, saying they were preoccupied by something or distracted by illness, aches, or feelings, or foreboding. We finally found some useful information from 3 boys. One was a 15-year-old Caucasian and 2 16-year-olds who were Hispanic. They were riding a bus near the front for the part of the trip. We were told that our test subject had tried to leave several times, but his pulling on the stop bell was always ignored, and the doors seemed to close right before he could get out. He would run and just not make it, or walk from a distance and get manipulated back into the line. Finally, he sat right at the head of the bus, so we could be close enough to get out in time. But every chance he got, there were just too many people swarming on or off for him to leave. Something about this event seemed to bother the boys. One of them was particularly irritated, but he couldn't explain the source. Under hypnosis, he described what to him was a moment of pure dread, that he had seen a few people in the crowd of passengers actually push the man back, suddenly hold him back or just trip him entirely, all while staring ahead innocently, like they didn't even notice that they were doing it. Finally, after shouting at the driver that he wanted off for a good 10 minutes, which the driver ignored aside from requesting the subject sit still and be quiet, the man went back to his seat, apparently giving up in despair. 2 of the boys said that the man actually shrieked and stumbled back to his seat in fright when the driver turned around at him. The other didn't realize that the 2 were in conflict, which is contrary to his usual habit of avidly looking for and watching fights on the particularly rough inner-city buses. After going back to his seat, the boys said they promptly forgot about the subject, most likely because he was not struggling anymore. The next time they saw him, he was sat 3 seats back, and then 5, and 7. But at no point could they recall seeing him stand up from his seat to move further back. This was all they could tell us, and it seemed to cost them plenty to even reveal this. On a side note, at the end of our session, the youngest teen screamed, "It was like it swallowed him in the end," and promptly had to be hospitalized for extreme psychosis.
Addendum 342-D, Subway Experiment 2. Note by the Supervising Officer.
Subway Experiment 2 was the first time we had an observer alongside the passenger. Agent Strahm paid attention to the smallest details of the Class D personnel's behavior, took various fluid samples, and tested organs, mostly the heart and the brain, until the man became too aggressive to examine. He also recorded an excellent log of subjective and objective events, since the physical examinations provided no special signs, except that the subject was in the midst of a typical nervous breakdown. Said information has been placed in document 342-D Alpha. Only the most relevant information has been included here. The 2 men board passage, the prisoner presenting the ticket. Immediately, he became aggravated and said the person accepting his ticket, "What did you say to me, bitch? Are you threatening me?" He was quickly hurried along to avoid an incident, and was almost immediately separated from the agent accompanying him by a pair of security guards. Agent Strahm reports that the guards appeared to be in a trance and attempted to separate him from the user, softly chanting, "One at a time, please." Nevertheless, he managed to push his way through by force, although he was forced to knock down one officer who attempted to impose himself between Agent Strahm and the door. On the train, the user became very quiet, surprising, as he was one of our most violent D-Class personnel. Agent Strahm continued testing and interviewing until the prisoner said softly, "Let me off this fucking train." Agent Strahm said that they could leave in a few more hours, at which point the user became insanely aggressive and began jumping up and down, off the walls and swinging on the bars and holders, while howling like a primate. Agent Strahm knocked him out with a blow to the head from his truncheon and handcuffed him to a pole. To assuage civilians' fear, he held up a badge that said he was a U.S. Marshal and went back to his analysis. Physical analysis indicated that the prisoner had entered a REM sleep state after only 3 minutes, which is especially unusual in a subject who had been knocked unconscious. After the subject woke up, Agent Strahm made the decision to abort the experiment and told the D-Class subject that he would help him get off the train as soon as possible. If he cooperated, holding him tightly, they attempted to leave but were prevented from doing so by a crowd. Agent Strahm attempted to exit a second time at the next stop, taking the precaution of holding up his badge and ordering all passengers to remain in their seats. Nonetheless, he was prevented from exiting the vehicle by a crowd boarding the train. Agent Strom reported that the prisoner was almost pulled away from him. He was unable to determine by what means, but claimed that the hands that pulled him back didn't belong to any passengers. Fortunately, Agent Strom had handcuffed himself to the subject and was able to maintain contact with the D-Class personnel. Although his attempt to exit the vehicle was unsuccessful, now in a state of panic, the prisoner clung to the agent like a frightened child so tightly that Strom had bruise marks on his chest and arms for days, and screamed several times that the handcuffs were slipping off. In the chaos, Agent Strom's badge was knocked out of his hand and he sustained a blow to the side of the head. During the ride to the third stop, Agent Strom, in a highly aggravated manner, interrogated the new passengers to find out who had hit him. No one would give him any hints or clues, and many became hysterical at the merest question or touch. One woman began wailing when Agent Strom grabbed her shoulder, although she was later silenced when he began shaking her vigorously. Security cameras recorded Agent Strom throwing a male passenger to the floor and striking another in the face while the D-Class personnel wept and clung to his leg. Given the extraordinary circumstances, the Board of Inquiry has chosen not to reprimand him for his lack of control. Agent Strom made a third attempt to get the prisoner off of the train, choosing to take a coordinated approach. Using his radio, he communicated with agents at the next stop. Despite difficulty due to static interference, unusually both sides said that they had heard the person talk in a quiet, small voice, like a frightened child, although both sides reported that they were using raised voices to be heard over the static. It was at this point that the prisoner began beating on the door, screaming to be let off the vehicle. Agent Strom, although sympathetic, warned the user that he would sedate him if he continued. This seemed to dismay the prisoner more than anything else. According to Agent Strom, he stated, "No, that's not how it would fall asleep. With a bottle of booze and, oh God, when they wake up they'll still be going. Still be on. Don't you get it? They wake up and even though they slept for hours they'll still be on. Who knows where?" He then stated his intent to cooperate and curled up in the fetal position, rocking slowly. Agent Strom, Macabjörn, Sinelur, and Smith, and Dr. Gunsler then attempted to lead the prisoner off the train. Despite all efforts to lead, cajole, and force him off the train, no efforts were successful. Agent Strom ceased his efforts after the prisoner was threatened with deadly force by Agent Smith, screaming at his fellow agents that he's not holding on to anything. Some kind of war. Other agents appeared confused, claiming that the subject was maliciously attempting to impede exit by holding onto one of the supporting bars. They continued in this assertion until it was pointed out to them the impossibility that this could take place, given that both of the prisoner's hands were being held by the agents at the time. In a last, desperate effort to extract the subject, the personnel attempted to dismantle the subway around the user through the use of cutting torches and power tools. Agent Strom remained with the subject, while the others exited to help Foundation personnel prepare. While the equipment was being set up and everyone's backs were turned, the doors closed, and the train immediately started up and pulled away of its own accord. The agents did not manage to catch up until the next stop, and the passengers immediately filed on, despite their commands not to. Agent Strom was later discovered lying on the subway platform 8 kilometers away in a comatose state. One end of his handcuffs was still attached to his own wrist, but the other one was empty. Traces of blood found on the metal have been determined to belong to the subject.
And this concludes part 1 of SCP-342. If you'd like to see a part 2, please drop a like on the video, subscribe for more daily SCP content, and I'll catch you tomorrow.